In the western Ghats of India, where monsoon clouds crawled over the mountains like living beasts, a boy named Sri Satish Ambati sat beneath a leaky tiled roof, listening, not to the thunder, but to something deeper. Patterns. He claimed later that he had always heard them. The dripping of rain from the roof gutters fell in irregular clusters, but somehow, he could sense the hidden rhythm beneath the chaos. A kind of mathematical heartbeat, the living pulse of the world. He was only 8 years old. While other children splashed through puddles or chased dragonflies near the coconut groves, Satish sat cross-legged on the veranda floor, chalk in hand, drawing strange symbols across the red stone tiles. Loops, spirals, clusters of numbers, branching arrows, primitive sketches of what he believed connected everything: weather, language, water, even people. His mother would step outside, wiping her hands on her apron. "Satish, what are you doing?" He would look up, eyes too focused for a child. "Trying to understand why the rain falls the way it does," he would say. She would laugh gently, shake her head, and return to the kitchen. But deep down she knew. Every mother knows when a child isn't merely curious, but touched by something larger. Even then, Satish didn't play with toys. He played with systems. He dismantled broken radios to examine the circuits. He reorganized the household's spice jars into patterns based on color frequency. He charted monsoon arrival dates on a notebook as if he planned to confront the cloud gods themselves. Most children grow into complexity. Satish grew from it. And yet, for all the brilliance shimmering behind his gaze, the world around him felt impossibly vast, uncontrollable, full of secrets locked behind the veil of mathematics. He wanted to lift that veil. He wanted to understand everything. In the quiet hours before sunrise, those sacred hours when time itself seems to hold its breath, Satish would tiptoe out of bed, books tucked under his arm. The village was dark. Only the street dogs stirred. The only light came from a small kerosene lamp placed on his desk, its flame trembling like a heartbeat. In its glow, Satish devoured books beyond his age: physics, combinatorics, logic, statistics. There was no internet then, no YouTube lectures, no online libraries. Knowledge came on printed pages that smelled of ink and dust, and he devoured them all. He wasn't driven by ambition or fear or competition. He was driven by wonder. He didn't read to escape. He read to see deeper. He didn't memorize formulas. He interrogated them. He didn't study to earn grades. He studied to see the architecture of the universe. By the time he reached secondary school, teachers looked at him not with admiration, but with mild suspicion. How did he answer questions before the chapters were taught? How did he derive formulas that weren't in the curriculum? Why did he appear to understand concepts he couldn't possibly have learned yet? Then came the incident that truly marked him. During a final exam, Satish solved a problem using a technique that the school board had not introduced. The examiner accused him of cheating. There was no way, the examiner said, that a child could spontaneously derive a proof typically taught at the university level. Satish didn't argue. He simply rewrote the proof from scratch, annotating every insight, each assumption, each logical leap, building it like architecture. When he handed in the new sheet, the room fell silent. The examiner read it, then read it again, then called two colleagues, then the principal. No one said a word. And for the first time in his life, Satish felt fear. Fear that his mind made him an outlier, a stranger among his peers. But then the principal spoke gently. "You are not ahead of the class, Satish. You're simply on a different road." The next day, the teachers quietly agreed to stop restricting him. Satish had outgrown the classroom. The world itself was now his textbook. Satish's relationship with computers began the way most epic stories begin, through accident. One afternoon, when he was 14, a cousin visiting from Bangalore brought home a used 386 IBM clone, an angular beige box with the mystery of a sacred relic. Most children would have played games. Satish did not. He stared at the machine as if it were alive. He touched the keyboard cautiously, like a surgeon approaching a patient. "What does it do?" he asked. "Anything you tell it to," the cousin replied. That was the moment, the spark, the collision of a boy's curiosity with the idea of programmable possibility. A universe inside a box. He learned DOS in a day. He learned BASIC in a week. He wrote his first simulation in a month, a crude model predicting monsoon variability using intuitive heuristics he later learned resembled primitive machine learning. He showed it to his father, who raised an eyebrow. What is this supposed to be? It's trying to learn. His father laughed. Can a machine learn? You tell me. Satish wasn't sure, but something deep inside whispered. One day it will. When he left home for university, the monsoon trails faded behind him, replaced by the sprawling confusion of academia. Large auditoriums, chalk dust, overheated projectors, and hallways filled with students who lived for grades rather than ideas. But Satish moved differently. He walked through laboratories like a cartographer exploring unmapped continents. Professors recognized the strange duality in him. Humility mixed with ferocious intellectual drive. He never bragged. He never argued. He never competed. He simply built things. Small models, data experiments, optimization hacks, simulation engines that made little sense to anyone but him. During presentations, classmates would whisper, "He's not speaking to impress the professor. He's speaking to something inside his head." It wasn't an insult. It was true. Satish had long since stopped trying to prove anything to anyone. He was chasing something no one else could see, the hidden geometry of intelligence. It was during these years that he encountered three ideas that shaped him forever. Nature optimizes everything. Evolution is the original machine learning system. Data speaks if you build a way to listen. Models aren't magic. They're stories told mathematically. These ideas simmered in him like unlit fire. Then something unexpected happened. He left India, not for prestige, not for glamour, not because he wanted a better life. He left because he needed a frontier. He needed a place big enough for the questions burning inside him. He needed to find the edges of intelligence. That place, he hoped, was America. When Satish first stepped onto American soil, it was not Silicon Valley that greeted him. It was Iowa. Specifically, the University of Iowa's Computer Science Department, seemingly the least cinematic place on Earth. Cornfields, quiet streets, winters that bit with unfeeling precision. But for Satish, it was perfect. No distractions, no noise, no social expectations, just silence and machines. He worked in labs until past midnight, hands trembling from cold, eyes burning from lack of sleep, heart racing every time he coaxed an algorithm into life. It was here that he encountered artificial intelligence in its contemporary form, not the philosophical musings of Turing or the early symbolic logic systems, but the beginnings of modern machine learning. Neural nets, early deep learning experiments, evolutionary computation, optimization landscapes. He inhaled it all, but it wasn't enough. Machine learning wasn't magic yet. It was slow. It was clumsy. It broke easily. It required endless manual tuning. It required human babysitters hovering over code like anxious parents. Satish found this unacceptable. How can we call this intelligence, he once remarked to a colleague, when the machine learns less efficiently than a toddler? He wanted more. He wanted the unthinkable, machine learning that democratized itself, not gate-kept by PhDs, not owned by Silicon Valley elites, not locked behind expensive tools. He wanted machine learning that belonged to everyone. Everyone. When Satish finally reached Silicon Valley, it wasn't the shimmering utopia he imagined. It was chaos. The dot-com aftershocks still shook the ecosystem. Startups rose and died like sparks from a bonfire. Engineers hopped between companies chasing stock options that evaporated overnight. Machine learning was still a fringe discipline, doubted, mocked, misunderstood. But Satish had come too far to retreat. He worked at startups. He worked at research labs. He worked at companies that claimed to embrace AI, but secretly feared it. In meeting rooms lit by fluorescent bulbs, he heard the same excuses. ML is too expensive, too slow, too complex. Only big tech can do it. Why automate this? Humans can do it fine. Satish listened politely. Then he would return home and code into the early morning hours, determined to prove them all wrong. He built experimental frameworks. He automated feature engineering. He attempted to make models that train themselves. He worked on distributed learning before it was cool. Friends called him obsessed. He wasn't. He was inevitable. There was a turning point, a moment that hardened in him like a gem. Satish was consulting for a large financial institution. Their data team consisted of highly paid PhDs, each guarding proprietary ML tools like alchemists protecting gold. One afternoon, a junior analyst, smart, ambitious, but lacking formal training, approached Satish with a simple question. How can I build a model like they do? A senior scientist laughed. You can't. You don't have the background. Satish's jaw tightened. He watched the young analyst walk away, shoulders slumped, dreams bruised. That night, Satish stared at his reflection in a dark office window and whispered, "This is wrong. Machine learning wasn't supposed to be mythology told by priests. It wasn't supposed to be a gated temple. It was supposed to empower people, to unlock potential, to close gaps, not widen them." He made a vow. AI will not belong only to experts. It will belong to anyone with data and a question. That was the true catalyst. The quiet moment that ignited H2O.ai. H2O.ai did not begin like other startups. There was no glamorous garage, no college dorm room, no carefully crafted pitch deck polished for Sand Hill Road. It began with rebellion, with a simple idea. Make machine learning open, fast, accessible, and scalable. For everyone. He gathered a small team, restless minds, misfits, mathematicians, optimizers, coders who saw the world differently. They were not polished, not corporate, not conventional. They were insurgents. They met in cramped rooms, whiteboards filled with scribbles, wires dangling from exposed ceilings, coffee cups stacked like sandbags. Every night felt like a siege. Every morning felt like a promise. They built H2O not as a product, but as a movement. Open source machine learning, enterprise-grade algorithms, automation that didn't infantilize the user but amplified them. A platform that embraced transparency, efficiency, and collaboration. The early days were brutal. Compute was scarce. Funding was thin. Competition was rising. Cloud giants loomed like titans. But Satish had something none of them did. A philosophy and a fire. Investors came. Investors went. Some demanded ownership. Some demanded direction changes. Some demanded that H2O abandon open source. Satish refused. You can't own the water, he said. H2O belongs to everyone. The metaphor was intentional, perfect, defiant. He protected the open source ethos like a warrior guarding a sacred flame. And slowly, the world took notice. Enterprises adopted H2O. Data scientists evangelized it. Hackathons flourished with it. Fortune 500 companies integrated it. Communities formed around it. H2O wasn't just software. It was liberation. A way for people everywhere, analysts, students, scientists, dreamers, to build models without begging for access. The industry shifted. The ecosystem evolved. Open source ML became mainstream. And through it all, Satish stood in the storm's center, calm, intense, unwavering. He wasn't building a product. He was building a future. People often notice something strange about Satish during demo sessions. He didn't speak about algorithms the way most founders did, through abstractions or buzzwords. He spoke about them as if they were living entities. This model is shy, he would say. This one is stubborn. This one learns slowly unless you coax it. This one likes more data. This one behaves like a child discovering language. People laughed, but they listened, because Satish wasn't anthropomorphizing for effect. He genuinely understood models as systems with quirks, tendencies, moods. It wasn't mysticism, it was intuition honed over decades. The intuition of a boy who once listened to equations in the rain. The AI revolution ignited like a supernova. Deep learning exploded. Enterprises panicked, needing automated ML overnight. Cloud platforms sprinted to build solutions. VCs threw billions at anything with AI in the name. But through the chaos, two truths emerged. Everyone had data. Almost no one knew how to use it. This was H2OS moment. AutoML was no longer a fringe concept. It was survival. H2O.ai's platform, polished through years of stubborn engineering, became indispensable. Banks, healthcare systems, retailers, tech giants, insurers, everyone came knocking. Partnerships blossomed. Licensing deals scaled. Enterprise revenues surged. H2O was no longer a rebel outpost. It was a force, a new pillar of enterprise machine learning. And Satish, once the boy who listened to storms, now stood at the helm of a global ecosystem, shaping the very narrative of accessible AI. The winter sun slanted through the blinds of the Palo Alto office, turning every dust mote into a tiny floating star. Satish stood alone beside the whiteboard, the remnants of a mathematical scrawl still half erased. Eigenvalues, gradient flows, little arrows marking the convergence paths of an algorithm that did not yet exist. He loved this hour, the hour before the world woke up, the hour where the mind could stretch its wings without interruption. And in this hour, he saw the shape of something new, a system that could flow, that could self-optimize, that could bring the once esoteric tools of machine learning into the hands of doctors, climate scientists, bankers, biologists, not merely engineers. A universal substrate of intelligence. But dreams, even mathematical ones, must survive daylight. The first sparks. The tiny room filled quickly as teammates trickled in. Arnaud with his habitual French shrug, Aaron with a stack of feature engineering notes, Clive ready with questions about distributed systems that would make most people sweat. Satish, Arnaud said, your algorithm has too much soul. It needs more RAM. They all laughed. A tired, caffeinated laugh, but the tension of the moment softened. This was their rhythm. Banter, debate, breakthroughs, repeat. This morning, however, the rhythm shifted. Because a message had arrived. A major bank, one of the banks, wanted to evaluate H2OS platform. If this landed, everything changed. If it failed, everything changed, too. Satish folded his arms, inhaling deeply. All right, he said. Let's build the version we wished existed yesterday. They worked till midnight, then deeper into the night. And when fatigue clawed at their resolve, when code broke and nodes failed and tempers flared, Satish whispered the mantra he always carried from his childhood. Courage is just patience with a soul. The pitch that wasn't a pitch. The boardroom in New York felt cavernous. 24 executives lined the table. 3 more joined via video. They were not here for dreams. They were here for numbers, risk reduction, compliance accuracy, fraud detection at scale, the language of enterprise finance. Satish began his presentation not with charts, but with a story. 25 years ago, he said, my father and I fixed radios side by side. He always said, if the signal is noisy, listen for the heart. Machine learning is the same. Patterns hide in noise, but only if you give every analyst, every scientist, the tools to hear them. He paused. And our mission is to help the world hear. He clicked the remote. Dashboards appeared. Models sparked to life. Transparency panels explained predictions. Distributed clusters hummed through billions of rows as if they were sand through fingers. There was silence. Then the head of risk modeling leaned forward. I've never seen anything this fast, she whispered. The CFO added, were this interpretable? And the CTO asked, almost suspiciously, how big is your team? Satish smiled gently. Small enough to move, large enough to matter. That day, the bank became one of H2O.ai's earliest and most enduring enterprise adopters. But victories invite storms. The machine learning world was heating like a furnace. VCs were pouring hundreds of millions into AI infrastructure companies. Big tech was devouring startups weekly. Enterprises were shifting from experimentation to aggressive adoption. And regulation was no longer a shadow, but a tremor in the ground. H2O.ai, once the beloved open-source underdog, had entered the arena of giants. The war for talent. H2O's headquarters buzzed with energy, but also with anxiety. Recruiters from trillion-dollar companies had begun circling like hawks, offering salaries that could purchase small islands. Some on the team felt the gravitational pull. One afternoon, David walked into Satish's office. I got another offer, he admitted, avoiding eye contact. Satish nodded. Is it life-changing? Yeah. And is our mission not? David froze. Satish continued. I won't match it. I can't. But here, you will build something that the world will use every day. Tools that outlast us. Intelligence that serves humanity, not replaces it. Silence. Then David sank into a chair. Damn it. You're doing that thing again. What thing? Making purpose louder than money. And he stayed. Not everyone did. Some departures hurt like old wounds that reopened in the rain. But Satish learned something profound. You cannot keep people. You can only keep their respect. Investors who believed in fire. The funding rounds were intense. Some investors demanded aggressive monetization. Some pushed for a pivot into full-stack cloud services. Some wanted to transform H2O into a closed ecosystem. But Satish had a compass forged from conviction. H2O must remain open, he insisted in every pitch. Open source is not a business handicap. It's an engine for global adoption. Investors raised their eyebrows. But adoption grew. Revenue grew. Trust grew. And the company's valuation, climbing round after round, began to crystallize the first real signs of founder wealth, paper gains that shimmered at the edge of reality. But valuations are echoes of potential. The real storm was still forming. The crisis no one saw coming. It happened in a hospital. A model, built on H2O, predicted patient risk incorrectly due to incomplete data. The hospital administrator panicked. A journalist overheard. And suddenly, AI error endangers patients. A headline sharp as a blade. H2O's name wasn't mentioned, but the platform powering the model was. Satish's stomach dropped when he read it. Not because of liability, not because of PR, but because human lives were involved. He flew to the hospital himself. He sat with nurses, doctors, analysts. He reviewed logs line by line. He listened, not to defend, but to understand. And finally, he discovered the issue. A human one. Manual data, entry missing 3 fields. No machine learning system could survive that. The hospital expected an argument. Instead, Satish proposed a solution. A new module that would detect missing data patterns. Automatic alerts. A transparency layer warning clinicians anytime features fell outside boundaries. A system built not for convenience, but for safety. You'll build this for us? For everyone, he replied. That night, alone in his hotel room, he whispered to himself, intelligence must be humble, or it becomes dangerous. Enterprises across the world began adopting H2O at a staggering rate. Healthcare networks, telecom giants, climate research institutes, manufacturing conglomerates, global banks, governments analyzing risk, fraud, and safety. The platform spread like water, flowing into cracks, filling voids, nourishing industries thirsty for intelligent transformation. And with growth came value, significant value, the wealth that didn't change him. When the company valuation crested into the realm that headlines love, hundreds of millions, then more, advisors urged Satish to take more equity off the table. You've earned this, they said. You should protect yourself. You have family to think of. He listened. He partially agreed. He partially acted. But at his core, the wealth was secondary, a shadow of the true reward. What mattered most was the vision sharpening into reality. An accessible, powerful, enterprise-grade AI platform that still honored the heart of open innovation. Still, the financial success reshaped the lives of early employees. Down payments on homes, children's education funds, debt erased, parents supported, dreams surfaced, and Satish felt quiet pride, not in himself, but in them. Founders build companies, he often said, but teams build futures. The turning point, AI for good. One of the most meaningful transformations came from an unexpected partnership, a collaboration with global climate scientists who sought to model rainfall, soil moisture, and ecological risk with unprecedented accuracy. They visited the H2O office one warm afternoon. They wore rugged boots, field jackets, sunburns earned from months of data collection. We don't need fancy models, the lead scientist said bluntly. We need models we can trust. Satish nodded. And trust, above all, meant transparency. They built a system that allowed climate researchers to drill down into every coefficient, every feature, every anomaly pattern. A living map of the planet's shifting lungs. Months later, when the first results streamed in, the lead scientist looked at Satish with awe. This could help save entire regions, she whispered. And Satish felt something inside him, the quiet thrill of humanity amplified, not replaced, by machine learning. The conference hall in San Francisco overflowed. Reporters, enterprise leaders, engineers, regulators, students, all gathered for H2O World. When Satish walked on stage, applause rose like a wave. He paused at the podium, looked out at the sea of faces, felt the weight of the journey that had led here. The nights debugging alone, the early fears of failure, the first customers who took a chance, the employees who believed, the mistakes that taught humility, the breakthroughs that reshaped industries. He took a breath and said, "We built H2O to bring AI to everyone, everywhere, responsibly, openly, fearlessly." Slides flicked behind him, not of revenue charts, but of impact. Doctors using models to predict sepsis faster. Farmers optimizing irrigation in drought-stricken lands. Banks detecting fraud with unprecedented accuracy. Students learning machine learning with tools they could run for free. And then, he revealed the next leap. A platform that democratizes generative AI safely and transparently for enterprises, for researchers, for communities. The hall erupted. The journey was far from over. But H2O had crossed into a new era, the legacy taking shape. Years later, when people spoke of Satish, they didn't mention valuations first. They didn't mention investors, or cap tables, or paper wealth. They mentioned the scientist who traveled across the world to fix a hospital model, the founder who kept his company open when everyone else closed theirs, the leader who believed AI should elevate humanity, not eclipse it. They mentioned his calm voice, his mathematician's mind, and the gentle conviction that technology must remain grounded in empathy. And somewhere, in a lab, a classroom, a field station under monsoon rains, an H2O model continued to run, learning, helping, flowing. Because the future Satish built was not a monument. It was a river that would never stop moving. The evening before the announcement of H2O's most ambitious generative AI platform, Satish found himself walking alone through the quiet streets of Mountain View. The air carried the scent of eucalyptus and distant rain clouds. Neon reflections painted the sidewalk. Restaurants buzzed softly behind windows as workers wound down for the night. But Satish's mind was elsewhere. He thought of how far they had come and how far they still had to go. The world was waking to the power of AI in ways both beautiful and terrifying. Companies were racing to deploy systems larger than cities. Regulators scrambled to make sense of the new frontier. Philosophers debated agency and consciousness. Ethicists worried about fairness at scale. And in the middle of it all stood H2O.ai, an elder of the ecosystem, yet still agile, still grounded in the principle that AI must serve everyone. A passing car's headlights illuminated his shadow on the sidewalk, long, stretched, almost spectral. What does legacy mean? The question struck him with surprising force. Is legacy measured in valuation? In customers? In patents filed, papers published, conferences packed to standing room? Or does legacy mean something quieter, something harder to measure? Lives changed. Knowledge democratized. Possibility expanded. He exhaled, watching his breath blur into the chilly air. Then he smiled to himself. Yes, that was enough. It had always been enough. A morning lit by fire. The next morning, H2O World opened its doors before sunrise. Engineers in company hoodies checked demo stations. Volunteers arranged chairs. The AV crew ran diagnostics repeatedly, triple-checking latency, microphones, overlays. The stage lighting cast a warm glow across the giant blue H2O emblem. bathing it in an aura of mythic significance. By 8 a.m., a line wrapped around the block. People from 50 countries gathered in the same room. Data scientists from Brazil, ML researchers from Japan, ESG analysts from Sweden, risk officers from South Africa, government cybersecurity teams from the US, PhD students from India who had grown up running H2O on laptops with missing keys. The atmosphere crackled. It felt like the launch of something that would echo for decades. When Satish stepped backstage, Aaron handed him a small object wrapped in a cloth. My father gave it to me before he passed, she said. He said to keep it until I met another person who built technology with heart. Satish unwrapped it. A tiny brass compass. Old, worn, but still steady. I can't take this, he began. Aaron shook her head. It's not for you. It's for the mission. He closed his hand around it gently, and time seemed to pause. The speech that was really a promise. When Satish walked onto the stage, the crowd rose in a standing ovation long before he spoke a word. Lights dimmed. Screens flickered awake. The hum of cameras filled the air. But Satish opened with simplicity. When I was a boy, he began, the smartest machine I knew was my father's radio. It could capture voices from thousands of kilometers away. We used to take it apart to see where the magic came from. He would say, complexity is just clarity waiting to be discovered. A few people smiled, the kind of smile born from recognizing truth. Satish continued, we're standing now in the middle of a transformation larger than electricity, larger than the internet. But the purpose of intelligence remains unchanged, to serve life. He paused. And today, we release the next generation of H2O, a platform for generative intelligence that is transparent, interpretable, safe, and open. A wave of murmurs rippled across the hall. On the screens behind him, H2OS domain-specialized LLMs, tools for regulated industries, generative models that explain their reasoning, a sandbox where companies could build responsibly without fear, guardrails that protected privacy and fairness, integration layers as fluid as water. The room erupted again, applause, shouts, pure energy. This, Satish said, is our promise. Power without opacity, speed without recklessness, innovation without exclusion. The strategic earthquake. Behind the scenes, something else was happening. Enterprises, the largest in the world, had quietly lined up to partner with H2O. Insurance giants, banks, health systems, energy companies, cloud providers, cybersecurity agencies. H2O's reputation for trustworthiness and open innovation had created demand that few companies ever experience. By afternoon, Satish was meeting CEOs in private rooms off the main hall. We want full integration. We want enterprise licensing for all generative workflows. We want you embedded in our cloud infrastructure. We want to build our sovereign LLM strategy around H2O. It was overwhelming. Not because of the scale, Satish had long prepared for scale, but because each conversation reaffirmed something deeper. The world believed in them. Not reluctantly, not hesitantly, but fully. Investors began calling with new offers. Partnerships grew. Revenue forecasts swelled. And the valuation curves in internal projections shifted upward again. For early employees, those who had risked the most, the rising tide meant life-changing equity outcomes. Buying first homes, changing schools for their kids, caring for aging parents, paying off loans long buried in shame, supporting siblings' education, leaving generational footprints. The wealth was not loud. It was deeply human. The letter Satish never expected. That night, when the conference ended and applause settled into memory, Satish returned to his hotel room. Exhaustion wrapped around him like a heavy cloak. He sat on the bed and opened his laptop, planning to review metrics. But one email caught his eye. Subject line, "Thank you for saving my sister." He clicked. A doctor from a rural hospital in India had written to say that their sepsis detection workflow, powered by H2O models, had triggered an alert that led them to intervene early. His sister had lived. His family had been spared a tragedy. His gratitude poured across the screen like liquid gold. Satish closed the laptop and pressed his palms to his eyes. For a moment, He was silent. Then he whispered, "That is enough. That is enough for a lifetime." The bridge to tomorrow. Months following H2O World marked one of the most expansive eras in the company's history. Customer adoption skyrocketed. Model training pipelines multiplied. Partnerships cemented across continents. Generative AI frameworks evolved with new transparency layers the world had not seen before. And inside H2O, teams worked with a mixture of intensity and peace, because purpose is a rare fuel, and they were rich with it. Satish instituted new research initiatives in climate modeling, medical diagnostics, fairness-aware ML, high-efficiency training, federated learning, sovereign AI architectures, energy-optimized generative systems. The company felt less like a machine and more like a living organism, a forest of ideas, each connected by ambition, humility, and the belief that intelligence should elevate, not dominate, the world. And Satish, walking through the hallways with that brass compass sometimes in his pocket, felt profoundly grateful. Fate had chosen him for this role, but he had chosen to honor it. The years when the world became fluid. The years following the generative AI launch blurred into a strange, beautiful continuum, a period of intense acceleration, global uncertainty, and unmistakable triumph. The world seemed to lean forward at once, as if humanity collectively sensed that something vast and luminous was unfolding. AI infiltrated every corner of life: medicine, finance, agriculture, logistics, education. Entire industries reconfigured themselves at a molecular level. Policy think tanks held late-night discussions about how to regulate large models. International summits debated alignment, safety, economic distribution. But amid the storm, H2O.ai remained steady, partly because the company had been preparing for this moment for years, partly because Satish understood something most others did not. The future wasn't about competing to build the biggest model. The future was about building the most trust. And trust was something H2O had nurtured long before it became fashionable. Even as new players crowded the landscape, cloud titans, newly minted unicorns, government-backed national labs, H2O's message remained the same. AI should be open. AI should be interpretable. AI should serve the public good. AI should elevate those left behind. It was a simple ethos. But in a world drowning in opacity, it was radical. And it resonated. The unexpected gathering. One crisp autumn morning, Satish received a message from a familiar name. "I'm convening a private roundtable. 20 people. Leaders shaping the next era of AI. I want you there." It was from a world-renowned economist, someone whose writings had shaped policy for decades. The event took place in a secluded retreat center overlooking the ocean. The building was made of glass and cedar, perched on a cliff where waves crashed below like soft explosions. Inside, the participants gathered: academics, founders, ethicists, regulators, even a Nobel laureate. They sat in a circle around a large table made of oak, each person representing a piece of the unfolding future. When the economist opened the session, his voice carried the weight of history. "We are here," he said, "not to debate what AI can do, but what it should do." He pointed towards Satish. "And we begin with the person whose company has arguably done more to democratize machine learning than anyone else." All eyes turned to him. Satish felt the familiar warmth of humility spread through his chest. He wasn't here to posture. He wasn't here to impress. He was here to serve the mission. He stood. "Most of the world," he began, "sees AI as either salvation or doom. I see it as a tool, one we have a responsibility to wield with clarity, compassion, and courage." He paused, letting the room absorb the words. "AI is not destiny," he continued. "It is direction, and direction is shaped by values." Silence swept across the room. Not empty silence, but full silence, the kind that comes when people sense truth moving through the air. "We must choose values that uplift humanity," Satish said. "Not values of extraction or control, but values of abundance and dignity." A few participants nodded softly. Others scribbled notes. One policymaker leaned forward. Then tell us, she said, what value should anchor the next century of intelligence? Satish looked out the window, at the ocean, at the horizon, at the endless motion of the world. Finally, he answered, belonging. That single word seemed to ripple through the room like a wave. Because belonging meant more than inclusion. It meant a world where no one was left behind. A world where intelligence was not a privilege, but a right. A world where technology served humanity, not the other way around. The economist smiled. And the conversation that unfolded over the next 5 hours would influence global frameworks in ways still felt years later. The bridge built from code and hope. Back at H2O, the post-launch momentum had turned the company into something akin to a lighthouse. Enterprises continued integrating the platform at breakneck speed. Universities adopted H2O tools in entire departments. NGOs used its models to track disease outbreaks, wildlife populations, water scarcity, food distribution inequities. Startups built products on top of it. Regulators cited its transparency features in policy drafts. Even competitors, sometimes reluctantly, acknowledged H2O's pioneering work. Inside the company, Satish felt a renewed intensity. The team had grown from dozens to hundreds, yet the culture remained remarkably intact. It still felt like a family of seekers, people who walked into the office each morning with the belief that they were adding something meaningful to the world. And in the center of it all was a new project, one that Satish had been nurturing quietly for months. H2O Guardian, a framework for safe, interpretable generative AI, not just for enterprises, but for nations, communities, and public institutions. Guardian wasn't about speed. It wasn't about scale. It wasn't about competing for model parameters. It was about creating a shared foundation of trust, a system that enforced transparency by default, documented reasoning trails, embedded fairness checks, protected privacy at a granular level, supported multilingual inclusion, optimized compute costs for underserved regions, enabled regional sovereignty. It was, in essence, an infrastructure for global empowerment. When Satish unveiled the internal prototype, the engineering team fell silent. Then one of the senior research scientists, someone notoriously difficult to impress, whispered, "This could change the entire governance landscape." Satish smiled. That's the idea. The long corridor of decisions. Late one evening, Satish walked through the quiet office, long after most employees had gone home. The building lights shimmered faintly against the glass walls, reflecting corridors that seemed to stretch into infinity. He found himself in the server room, a place he often gravitated to when he needed clarity. The machines hummed softly, their LED lights blinking like tiny stars stitched into the darkness. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he imagined he could hear the flow of data through the circuitry, the pulse of models training in distant regions, the heartbeat of algorithms learning the intricacies of language, the whispers of AI agents assisting doctors, farmers, teachers, analysts. He thought of the decisions that had brought H2O to this point, leaving academia, leaving other opportunities, choosing the harder path, building something from scratch, convincing investors, convincing customers, convincing himself. There had been nights when he doubted everything. Nights when he wondered if H2O would survive the next quarter. Nights when the burden felt like walking uphill against a landslide. Nights when he questioned whether democratization was even possible in an industry where wealth and compute were so unevenly distributed. But each time, something pulled him forward. A memory of his father's hands tinkering with the radio. A conversation with an engineer who said H2O had changed their life. A message from a student who said their first ML breakthrough happened on H2O Flow. A community that believed in openness. A mission that refused to dim. And now, standing in the quiet server room, he realized something profound. He was no longer driving the mission. The mission was driving him. The storm that tested the steel. No great journey is without storms. And H2O's greatest test arrived unexpectedly. A global data breach, not caused by H2O systems, but by a major cloud provider, sent shockwaves across the tech world. Governments panicked. Enterprises froze deployments. International agencies demanded immediate reports and audits. Fear spread like smoke. In the chaos, misinformation swirled. News outlets conflated unrelated events. Some companies implicated AI vendors unfairly. Even H2O, despite having no involvement, faced scrutiny. Satish mobilized the leadership team overnight. Meeting rooms buzzed with activity even past midnight. Engineers pored over logs. Legal teams drafted responses. Customer success leads reassured every partner individually. But the real moment came when Satish stepped into a televised hearing with global regulators. A panel of officials, stern, skeptical, questioned him intensely. How can we guarantee transparency? How can we prevent systemic bias? How do we ensure companies do not abuse generative tools? What accountability exists for models that behave unpredictably? Satish didn't flinch. He answered methodically, calmly, truthfully. He emphasized the need for auditable models. He demonstrated H2OS interpretability. He showed fairness dashboards. He walked them through provenance tracking. He highlighted the architecture of Guardian. At the end of the hearing, an official who had been the harshest critic leaned back and said, "Your company sets a standard others should follow." By morning, headlines shifted. Enterprises doubled down on H2O. Regulators praised their transparency. Trust soared higher than before. And for the first time in weeks, the team slept peacefully. The quiet celebration. A month later, Satish came to the office early, before sunrise. When he entered the kitchen area, he found the entire team already gathered, standing around a long wooden table filled with pastries, handwritten notes, and a banner made of glittering blue letters. "Thank you, Satish." He froze. The CTO stepped forward. "You carried us through the storm," she said. "We wanted to carry you today." One by one, team members handed him small cards. Each card contained a personal message. H2O paid for my mother's surgery. I bought my first home. My daughter wants to study ML because of what we build. You gave me a career I didn't think I was smart enough for. You made me believe the industry could be kind. When Satish finished reading, his eyes glistened. He lifted the brass compass from his pocket. "I didn't do this alone," he said softly. "We walked this path together." The room filled with applause, warm, familial, electric. It wasn't a celebration of wealth or valuation or success. It was a celebration of meaning. And meaning is the most enduring currency of all. A world that needed what they built. As the years unfolded, H2O Guardian became a cornerstone in global AI frameworks. Nations adopted it. Institutions built policies around it. Regulators cited it. Developers extended it. Communities localized it. Schools used it to teach ethics. Hospitals used it to ensure fairness. Banks used it to ensure explainability. Governments used it for transparency. And in every deployment, the same principle guided it. Intelligence should make the world more human, not less. H2O's reputation soared. Its financial soared. Its social impact soared. But for Satish, none of that was the end point. The end point had always been the same. To build tools that outlived him. To leave the world more equitable than he found it. To honor the boy who once dismantled radios in a small house lit by the promise of possibility. The letter he wrote but never sent. One evening, long after midnight, Satish sat alone in his office. The lights were dim. The night outside was still. Only the soft hum of the building kept him company. He opened a fresh document and began typing a letter. Not to investors. Not to customers. Not to regulators. To his younger self. You will doubt yourself. You will face storms. You will walk paths others fear to tread. You will build something the world needs. And one day, you will realize that intelligence is not about what machines can do, but what humans can become through them. When he finished, he didn't send it. He simply closed the laptop. The letter wasn't for the world. It was for him. A reminder. A compass. A quiet truth. The sky beyond the summit. On the first day of spring, years after that fateful H2O World keynote, Satish visited an overlook in the hills above Silicon Valley. The sky was painted in shades of gold and lavender. The air smelled of blossoms and possibility. Below him, the valley stretched like a living circuit board. So much had changed. So much was still changing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the brass compass Aaron had given him. He held it up to the light. The needle quivered slightly, then steadied. Satish smiled. "We are not done," he whispered. "Not even close." And with the brisk wind brushing past him, carrying traces of eucalyptus, sunlight, and tomorrow, he turned away from the overlook and walked down the hill, already planning the next chapter of H2O's mission. Because the future was not a place you waited for. It was a place you built. And Satish was still building, still dreaming, still believing, still walking toward the horizon with a compass in his hand and a world in need of belonging. The summit was never the end. It was only the sky beyond, the compass and the currents of history. The following morning, as sunlight spilled across the bay like molten copper, Satish found himself sitting alone in the quiet corner of H2O's headquarters. Not the big glass-walled conference rooms, not the decorated hallways filled with awards and patents, but a small nook near the engineering wing. The place where interns often sat with laptops balanced on their knees. The place where dreams began anonymously. The brass compass rested in his palm. Its weight felt disproportionate to its size, as if it carried something more than metal, a story, a lineage, a reminder that purpose cannot be scaled away. He turned it slowly. North aligned perfectly, but something else aligned too, a feeling he had not named yet. Responsibility. Not the generic corporate kind. Not fiduciary duty, shareholder duty, or contractual duty. This was the duty of a builder, to ensure the world moved forward without losing its soul. He slipped the compass into his pocket again and stood. There was still much work to do. The mirrored conference room. Later that month, Satish and Aaron sat across from each other in the large mirrored conference room, the one where moonlight used to reflect at night, making the floor glow silver. Tonight, though, only the dull hum of server fans and street lights seeping through the blinds filled the silence. "We're entering a new era," Aaron said, scrolling through a dashboard lit with numbers that didn't look real. Deployments across sectors, licensing requests, waitlists for advanced LLM modules, global cloud interest, regulatory collaborations, security frameworks being requested by governments. H2O is not just a company anymore, she said. It's becoming part of the global operating system. Satish exhaled slowly. "I know. And with that," she added, "comes a decision we've been postponing." He leaned back in his chair. He already knew which one. So he said softly, "Do we stay private forever, or do we take the leap?" Aaron looked up from the screen. "It's not about an IPO. It never is," Satish agreed. "This is about stewardship," she said. "About whether H2O is ready to operate in the sunlight of public expectation. Whether you're ready." The words lingered. The truth, he wasn't sure. The world was accelerating. AI breakthroughs were appearing weekly, sometimes daily. Every model release sparked debates about ethics, energy cost, labor disruption, intelligence alignment. Every success carried invisible shadows. But H2O had always been different. Built on open source DNA, built on transparency, built on collaboration. Maybe the world needed that more than ever. Still, the decision felt like standing on a cliff. "How did we get here so fast?" Satish asked quietly. Aaron smiled. "You built a company that believed people deserved tools as powerful as their potential." History tends to listen to that kind of conviction. The night of the architects. At around midnight, engineers began filtering into the building. Not because they were asked to, not because of deadlines. Because that night, without scheduling, without coordination, something pulled them there. Call it intuition. Call it culture. Call it the invisible thread that binds builders to their craft. In the heart of the engineering floor, clusters formed spontaneously. Teams that normally worked in separate domains gathered around shared screens. Gen AI infrastructure engineers discussing memory-optimized architectures. Applied scientists reviewing interpretability logs to refine transparency. Security leads analyzing federated learning protocols. AutoML veterans comparing differential privacy results with the next-gen LLM sandbox. It was a night of architects. of minds electric with possibility. Satish wandered into the room without announcing himself. He watched silently. The glow of monitors lit the faces of the people he had built this world with. Some had joined in the early days when the office was a cramped space with mismatched chairs. Others had joined later, drawn by H2O's reputation for principled innovation. None of them noticed him at first. They were too immersed, too alive, too connected to the mission to look up. He felt something warm pull at his chest. "This," he said softly to Erin, who had come to stand beside him, "is the real company." She nodded. "These people, they don't just work here," she said. "They believe in what we're doing." And Satish, watching the quiet symphony of engineers shaping the future at 1 a.m., felt a truth settle in. Legacy wasn't the platform. It wasn't even the models. Legacy was the people who would build long after he was gone. A conversation with tomorrow. 3 days later, Satish boarded a flight to Washington, D.C. Not for lobbying, not for business development, but for something more profound. A closed-door summit on AI's role in government transparency, national security, and public trust. The room was small. No press, no cameras, no prepared speeches. Just leaders who understood that the future was a negotiation, not an inevitability. A senator leaned forward. "Mr. Ambati, your company has become critical infrastructure. We need your help shaping what comes next and making sure this technology remains aligned with the public good." Satish listened carefully. "We want to know," another official added, "whether generative intelligence can be guided rather than unleashed." Satish considered the question. "Yes," he said finally, "but only if we treat it like a partner, not a weapon." They waited. "And only if the people building it carry a moral compass stronger than their ambition." Someone asked, "And does H2O?" He reached into his pocket. The brass compass was there, warm from his hand. "We try," he said. "Every day." It was the most honest answer he could give. The unbroken thread. When Satish returned to California, he found a small package waiting for him on his desk. No sender name, just a handwritten note. For the next chapter. Inside was a single object. A thin, polished wooden thread, hand-carved, minimalist, organic. Attached was another note. "Every revolution is carried by an unbroken thread, purpose. Never lose yours." Satish turned it over in his fingers. The grain of the wood seemed almost alive. He placed it beside the compass. Symbols of two eras. The mapped past and the unwoven future. He realized then. The summit he had reached was not a peak. It was a bridge. The storm before the clearing. 2 weeks later, the tech world exploded with headlines. A new generative model from a major AI lab had leaked, prematurely, chaotically, spreading across the open internet with no safety, no guardrails, no transparency. Security agencies panicked. Regulators demanded answers. Companies froze deployments overnight. Fear rippled through the ecosystem. News anchors spoke with urgency. Social media erupted. Investors grew anxious. And suddenly, everyone turned to the companies known for responsibility, for ethical grounding, for sanity in a time of turbulence. They turned to H2O. Satish's phone buzzed nonstop. "Can your guardrails interface with this rogue model? Can you help us mitigate risk? Can you build a stabilization pipeline? Can you bring transparency to something that was never designed with transparency in mind?" It was chaos, but chaos is where mission reveals itself. H2O assembled emergency task forces. Engineers volunteered sleepless nights. Scientists built new interpretability layers in record time. Partnerships were mobilized across industries and governments. And slowly, deliberately, the panic receded. The storm passed. A clearing emerged. And the world remembered. Responsibility matters. Integrity matters. Foundation matters. H2O had become not just a player, but a stabilizer, the quiet hand that steadied a trembling ecosystem. The call at dawn. One morning near the end of this turbulent period, Satish's phone rang at 5:17 a.m. He answered groggily. "Satish," said a voice he recognized. A CEO of one of the world's largest corporations, someone whose net worth was measured in billions and ambitions in whole continents. "I need to say something." Satish rubbed his eyes. What happened? You saved the industry, the CEO said quietly. Your team, your culture, your guardrails, your belief in openness. Without exaggeration, you prevented real harm. Satish sat up slowly. Thank you, the CEO continued. My board thanks you. Our regulators thank you. And someday, the public will too. The call ended. Satish stared at the ceiling. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel victorious. He felt steady, grounded. The compass inside his desk drawer felt heavier than ever. Purpose had met reality and held firm. The light that escapes the storm. By the end of the quarter, everything changed. Valuation, demand, global footprint, influence, recognition. But none of it felt like the reward. The real reward came one evening when Satish walked into the office and saw something small, almost invisible. A junior engineer teaching a new intern how to interpret a model's fairness metrics. Their faces lit by the gentle glow of the dashboard. The intern asked, confused, "Why do we check these things so carefully?" The engineer smiled. "Because here," she said, "we don't just build AI that works. We build AI that deserves to exist." Satish felt his chest tighten. That was it. That was everything. Legacy, mission, purpose, the unbroken thread. He stood there for a long moment, unseen, letting the warmth of that simple exchange fill him. Then he whispered something to himself, something no one heard, but something that would guide everything that followed. So long as this spirit survives, he said, H2O will always belong to the future. The horizon that refused to stay still. The following months unfolded like the slow turn of a massive planetary gear. Each movement subtle, quiet, but reshaping the world in ways that only hindsight would reveal. H2O's generative platform became the backbone of dozens of industries. Hospitals integrated it into diagnostic flows. Banks deployed it in risk and fraud defenses. Energy grids used it to predict consumption shifts and outage points. Climate researchers trained models that read oceans, forests, and clouds with unprecedented fluency. A new realization settled over global enterprise leaders. AI was no longer a tool. It was becoming an infrastructure, a living nervous system. And H2O had become one of its most trusted arteries. Satish felt the momentum everywhere, in the excited emails from partners, in late-night Slack threads where engineers brainstormed ideas with the intensity of poets, in the hushed conversations with governments seeking a compass to navigate the storm. But momentum carried something else too. A whisper, a question. What now? He had climbed the mountain. The company was thriving. The mission was recognized, respected, embraced. But the horizon kept stretching forward, receding like a tide that refused to be reached. And Satish understood. There is no summit. There is only the climb. A visit to the roots. One afternoon, after speaking at a global AI ethics conference in Munich, Satish made an unplanned detour to the small village in India where he had grown up. He hadn't returned in more than a decade. As he stepped onto the dusty road leading to his childhood home, memories washed over him. The heat of the sun on cracked pavement, the distant laughter of children playing cricket, the smell of tamarind and burning wood, the sound of bicycles rattling over uneven stones. He passed the old electronics repair shop where he and his father had spent afternoons taking apart radios and televisions, searching for their hidden logic. The shop looked almost the same, a wooden counter, a faded sign, walls lined with wires like veins. The owner recognized him instantly. Satish, he whispered, eyes widening. Satish smiled. It's been a long time. Word spread quickly, as it always does in tight communities. Within minutes, neighbors gathered around him. Some hugged him. Some cried. Some simply placed a hand on his shoulder in quiet pride. One woman said, "My son uses your platform in college. He shows me the tools. He says AI can help farmers one day." Another man added, "My nephew avoided a misdiagnosis because of the hospital's AI system. They told us it was built on your models." Satish felt his throat tighten. This was the invisible impact. The kind you don't see on revenue charts or investor decks. The kind that lives in the margins of humanity, between heartbeats. Later that evening, He stood on the rooftop of his old home. The sky was enormous. The stars glowed with fierce clarity, unpolluted by city light. He closed his eyes. "Father," he whispered, "I hope I'm honoring what you taught me." A warm breeze answered. Or maybe it was only memory. The paradox of progress. Back in the United States, the world was accelerating again. New AI companies emerged daily. Some responsible, some reckless, some brilliant, some terrifying. Models grew larger, faster, stranger. Some generated breathtaking art. Some hallucinated with unnerving confidence. Some bent reality itself. AI ethics debates echoed across continents. Tech leaders testified before governments. Philosophers questioned the nature of intelligence. Economists warned of disruption and abundance colliding. Satish stood in the middle of it all, a calm center in a storm of possibility and fear. His team often asked him, "Are we doing enough?" He would answer, "We're doing what we can, and what we can do must always grow." And so it grew. H2O expanded research into causality-focused generative models, transparent reasoning pathways, low-carbon training architectures, domain-bound intelligence bundles, emergency response cognitive agents, regulated industry LLM interpreters, privacy-preserving multi-agent systems. Bit by bit, the company built a blueprint for what AI should be, not merely what it could be. And the world noticed. The night of 1,000 screens. One Friday evening, Satish entered the office after dinner with friends. Most of the building was dark, but the research wing glowed softly with blue-white light. Dozens of monitors illuminated the hall. A handful of engineers were still there, young, driven, animated by the kind of intellectual fire that doesn't obey business hours. On the screens were medical datasets, energy forecasts, policy simulations, climate maps, synthetic supply chain stressors, fabricated emergency scenarios, interpretability layers glowing like neural constellations. They were running the 1,000 screens test, H2O's internal ritual of stress testing new models against a chaotic collage of real-world scenarios. "Didn't know you all were still here," Satish said with a small smile. One engineer grinned back. "We wanted to make the model bulletproof before Monday's release." Another added, "Besides, this is fun." Satish looked at the glowing screens, at the concentration etched on each face, at the joy radiating from people doing work that mattered. And something inside him shifted. He realized that the company no longer relied on him to set the moral compass. They had internalized the mission. It lived inside them, inside their habits, inside their engineering choices, inside their late-night commitments to excellence. The unbroken thread had woven itself into 1,000 minds. He felt a warmth gather in his chest. This is how a legacy becomes self-sustaining. The decision that would echo for decades. Weeks later, Satish sat once more with Aaron, this time not in a mirrored conference room, but outside, on the rooftop balcony overlooking the bay. Fog curled around the lights of Moffett Field. The moon glowed like a watchful guardian. Wind carried the scent of an impatient future. "Well," Aaron said, legs crossed, eyes scanning the skyline. "It's time." Satish nodded slowly. They had spent months debating. Not whether to grow, not whether to scale, but how. Quietly, boldly, responsibly, historically. "We're going to do it," Satish finally said. Aaron didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. They were going to prepare the company for the next transformational step. Not a public offering merely for capital, but a structural evolution that would allow H2O to steward global AI infrastructure for the next half-century. It would require new governance, new transparency, new global oversight, new public accountability structures, new ethical standards, new investment into long-term scientific research, new partnerships with governments and NGOs, new commitments to education access worldwide. It was the biggest decision in the company's history. It would reshape the industry. It would define Satish's legacy. He looked out over the bay. Lights flickered on the water like scattered stars. "We're going to build," he whispered, "the world's first ethical, planetary-scale AI utility." Aaron inhaled sharply. Then she nodded. "We'll do it," she said. Not because the market demanded it, not because investors wanted it, not because it was profitable, but because it was the right thing to do. The final night before the leap. The night before H2O's announcement of this unprecedented global initiative, Satish wandered the quiet halls once more. On the ground floor, a janitor buffed the floors to a mirror shine. In the cafeteria, a group of interns huddled around a laptop, whispering excitedly about some idea they didn't yet realize would change their careers. In the server room, machines hummed like a sleeping giant. Satish touched the brass compass in his pocket. North. Always north. A quiet voice inside him whispered, "You've built a company that teaches intelligence. But more importantly, you've built a company that remembers humanity." He stood silently for a long moment. Then he whispered into the dark, "I'm ready." The dawn of the unwritten future. When morning arrived, it did not arrive quietly. Cameras waited outside the building. Press vans lined the street. Analysts live-blogged predictions. Developers around the world tuned into the stream. Investors leaned forward. Competitors held their breath. Regulators sharpened pencils. And Satish Ambati walked onto the stage for the announcement that would mark the end of one era and the beginning of another. The stage lights brightened. The room fell silent. He held the brass compass gently in his palm. And then, he began to speak. Night in Mountain View had a particular stillness, a serene quiet that only deepened when one stayed working past midnight. In the darkened windows of the H2O.ai offices, only a handful of lights remained. The glow above Satish's desk, the pale reflection of monitors across the engineering room, and the faint shimmer from the prototypes running on racks that hummed like restless beasts. Satish stood by the window, looking at the dim streets outside, but his mind was anywhere but present. It roamed through the past decade of his life, the whirlwind of building a company from an impossible dream, the sacrifices, the triumphs, the near collapses, the constant reinvention. Behind every success stood a pillar of exhaustion he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. Tonight, he let himself feel it, not to despair, but to understand. Behind him, the office door clicked open softly. It was Arno. Even at 2 a.m., he held a mug of fresh tea. "You're still here?" Satish asked. Arno smirked. "Coming from the man who has slept here 3 nights this week, that question loses all moral authority." They both laughed quietly. Then silence. The kind of silence where real truth can be spoken. "You're worried," Arno said. Satish didn't answer at first, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. Finally, "The world is changing too fast. The models are growing too quickly, the compute too expensive. We are racing giants. OpenAI, Google, DeepMind. Some days it feels like we're playing chess on a board where our opponents get twice as many moves." "You're not afraid of giants," Arno said. Satish turned. "No, I'm afraid of losing our purpose in the noise." That struck at something deep, not business strategy, not competition, but the core philosophy of why H2O.ai existed at all. They were not building AI to dominate markets. They were building AI to democratize intelligence for everyone, to empower the small, to strengthen the overlooked, to elevate every person who didn't have a PhD in machine learning. H2O.ai stood as a living contradiction in an industry marching toward exclusivity, an industry whose victories often came from concentrating power, locking knowledge behind proprietary walls, and widening the gap between the technologically rich and poor. Satish refused that path, yet refusing it came with a cost he felt tonight more than ever. Arno placed a hand on his shoulder. "Purpose doesn't vanish, Satish. It only gets buried under the weight of the work. But it's still there." Satish exhaled, his breath fogging slightly against the window. "We need to evolve," he said. "The next era. It won't be about just AutoML or algorithm efficiency or enterprise deployment. The next era will be about trust, about models that serve humanity, not replace it, about giving intelligence to the world without creating a world where intelligence becomes a weapon." Arno nodded slowly. "So we build it. The trust layer. The new foundation." Satish turned back toward the room, filled with servers and prototypes. Not we, he said. Everyone. The whole team. The whole ecosystem. AI must become a public good, a force multiplier for good. A long silence followed. Finally, Satish said, "Let's start." The birth of the AI cloud. The next morning, H2O.ai's engineering room felt charged, as if every workstation hummed with purpose. They weren't just building AutoML anymore. They were building a platform with three pillars. 1. Transparent AI, models that anyone could inspect. 2. Responsible AI, guardrails that protected misuse. 3. Accessible AI, tools that anyone could run, anywhere. It was a bold reinvention, not an incremental update, but a philosophical transformation. The AI Cloud initiative began with a single design document written personally by Satish. It was 17 pages long, handwritten in looping blue ink, ending with a single sentence. Build AI that builds others up. That became their North Star. Soon, the office buzzed like a hive. Engineers huddled around whiteboards. Product leads debated in hallways. Customers flew in from New York, London, Singapore to understand what this new vision meant. VCs called. Private equity groups called. Government agencies called. Everyone sensed something massive was happening. And they were right. Because what H2O.ai was quietly crafting, without press releases, without hype, was the world's first truly open, enterprise-grade, ethical AI ecosystem. Not just models, not just code, but a philosophy engineered into software. The battlefield of enterprise AI. By 2021, the landscape had become a battlefield. Everyone wanted enterprise AI. Banks wanted faster risk scoring. Hospitals wanted automated diagnosis. Retailers wanted forecasts. Governments wanted intelligence systems that could detect fraud, threats, inefficiencies. And in every RFP, every procurement meeting, every technical evaluation, the same three logos appeared. H2O.ai, Data Robot, SageMaker. It became a rivalry, unspoken, but universally acknowledged. Analysts compared them. Customers tested them against each other. Investors speculated who would dominate the market. Some startups buckled under such pressure. But H2O.ai thrived. Why? Because while the others built tools, H2O.ai built trust. When a hospital chain in Texas needed AI that met regulatory compliance, they called H2O.ai. When a major insurer in London wanted full auditability, they chose H2O.ai. When a Fortune 100 bank needed transparent credit models, they standardized on H2O.ai. Success arrived not as explosions, but as a steady drumbeat. Deal after deal, deployment after deployment, value accumulating like compound interest. And along the way, the founders, Satish especially, found themselves transformed from entrepreneurs into leaders whose influence extended far beyond the company walls. He spoke at the United Nations. He advised national AI policies. He mentored young founders from India, Indonesia, Brazil. People didn't see him as the AutoML guy anymore. He had become a philosopher engineer, a bridge between cultures, a builder of futures. But the greatest transformation was yet to come. The storm and the breakthrough. Late 2022 brought upheaval. The AI world was shaken by the emergence of foundation models, giant, expensive, compute-hungry architectures trained on unimaginable datasets. It was not just a technological shift. It was a paradigm shift. Suddenly, the debate was not about AutoML. It was about the future of intelligence itself. Tech giants raised billions. GPU shortages became global. Startups pivoted overnight. Every AI company had to make a choice: adapt or become irrelevant. The board demanded a plan. Investors wanted clarity. Competitors pivoted aggressively. And in the most intense strategic meeting H2O.ai ever held, Satish stood at the front of the room, quiet, composed, and certain. "We will not chase giants," he said. "We will empower the world to build their own giants." That was the spark, the breakthrough, the reinvention that defined the next era of H2O.ai. They built tools that allowed enterprises to train their own foundation models, smaller, faster, domain-specialized, efficient, not trillion-parameter beasts, but surgical intelligence, precision models, models that banks could trust, hospitals could use, and governments could deploy responsibly. Efficiency became their superpower. The world was obsessed with scale, but Satish understood something deeper. Intelligence is not valuable because it is big. Intelligence is valuable because it is right. Enterprise after enterprise adopted their new stack. And once again, H2O.ai found itself at the center of the world's AI transformation. The climb toward immortality. By 2023, the company stood as one of the most trusted AI providers in the world. Partnerships stretched across continents. Strategic deals with NVIDIA, AWS, and major government agencies created waves of attention. The valuation soared. Founder shares grew into generational wealth, not through luck, but through grit, vision, and an unbroken sense of purpose. Satish often walked the office halls late at night, watching engineers absorbed in their screens, designers polishing interfaces, product managers rehearsing pitches. These people were the reason the company succeeded. They were the reason the mission lived. He knew he had become wealthy. But wealth was not the legacy he sought. Purpose was. Impact was. A world uplifted by intelligence, not subjugated by it. And though he rarely admitted it aloud, he understood that H2O.ai had become more than a company. It was a movement, a philosophy encoded in software, a new kind of technological culture, one rooted in generosity rather than dominance. And that, far more than valuation, far more than enterprise deals, far more than accolades, was what filled him with pride. The world had tried to bend AI into a weapon. H2O.ai had turned it into a torch. Fate had chosen him for this role, but he had chosen to honor it. For Satish, the sentence echoed like a quiet bell, vibrating through the empty hotel room long after the words had vanished from his lips. He sat there, still, his palms covering his eyes, his breath steadying as if each inhale were a promise and each exhale a release from the weight of the world. Outside the window, the night felt eternal, a cloudless black canvas sprinkled with the faint glimmer of distant possibilities. The city below murmured with after-hours conversations, clinking glasses, the rumble of rideshares ferrying conference attendees to their hotels. All of it, the noise, the motion, the ceaseless pulse of innovation, moved on, unaware of the quiet revolution that had taken place on a stage earlier that day. Satish slowly lowered his hands. He wasn't alone anymore, not truly. H2O had become something larger than a company. It had become a movement, a philosophy, a new way for humanity to speak to its own intelligence. And yet, at the edge of triumph sat a new, sharper truth. This was only the beginning. The whisper of tomorrow. Jet lag nagged softly at the edges of his consciousness, but Satish didn't sleep. Instead, he found himself pacing his room, replaying every moment of the day, every handshake, every cheering crowd, every whispered, "This changes everything," spoken by business leaders who had once dismissed AI as an academic curiosity. He should have felt proud. He should have felt victorious. He should have felt done. But he felt none of those things. Instead, a persistent whisper rose in him, the kind that arrives when history changes course. What comes next? He stepped onto the balcony. The breeze hit him gently, brushing past as if urging him to breathe. In the distance, the lights of Silicon Valley shimmered like stars that had fallen to earth. This place, this improbable cluster of minds, money, and ambition, had birthed giants, destroyed giants, and resurrected them in reshaped forms. It was a valley not of silicon, but of reinvention. And tonight, Satish stood at the edge of its next reinvention. Yet, as he looked at the suburban constellations below, he realized something. H2O wasn't competing with companies. Not really. It was competing with fate, with the moral arc of intelligence, with the shape civilization would take in the age of thinking machines. He rested his hands on the balcony railing. Humans had built AI, but AI was beginning to build the world. And Satish, who had dreamed of democratizing intelligence since the days he cracked open his father's radio, now found himself in a position he never could have predicted as a boy. He was becoming one of the architects of human destiny. The thought was humbling, frightening, and strangely beautiful. The morning that broke the horizon. He didn't sleep that night. But morning came anyway. A soft, amber line stretched across the sky, melting the darkness into shades of gold. Birds chirped with an optimism that felt almost scripted. Satish closed his laptop, having written nothing but stared at everything. Today would be the day he revealed the final piece, the part he had told no one about, not even his closest teams. The part that could redefine H2O for decades. Or sink it. Satish took a long shower, letting the water wash the fatigue from his eyes, but not the weight from his shoulders. He dressed slowly, simple black shirt, dark jeans, the same outfit he'd worn in the early days when H2O was still a handful of enthusiasts in a small room, dreaming too loud for their own good. Before leaving, he reached into his bag and pulled out Aaron's compass. Worn, brass, beautifully imperfect. He pressed it into his pocket, not as a charm, but as a reminder. Purpose must guide progress, and progress must serve people. He whispered the words like a mantra. Let today build bridges. Then he stepped out into the sunrise. The final reveal. H2O World Day 2 was bigger than Day 1. The venue buzzed with the feverish electricity of a renaissance. People filled the courtyard, the hallways, the stairwells, the coffee stations. Every corner overflowed with discussions, not about stock prices, not about speculation, but about engineering problems, fairness frameworks, open source ideas, architecture design, and questions of alignment. It felt like the gathering of a global guild of builders. Satish could feel their energy before he walked on stage. It pressed against the air like a storm front. When he finally stepped into the light, thousands of faces rose to meet him. He sensed it immediately. They weren't waiting for a keynote. They were waiting for a vision. Satish raised the microphone. I want to show you the last piece of what we've been building, he said, his voice steady. The piece that makes everything else possible. The screens behind him flickered. A soft hum filled the auditorium. And then, a living interface unfolded, fluid and luminous, shaped like water flowing into dynamic forms, shifting from code to context to reasoned explanations. This, Satish said, is our generative governance engine. A transparent conscience for artificial intelligence. The room froze, not in confusion, but in awe. Satish continued. We asked ourselves a question. If AI is becoming powerful enough to make decisions that shape human futures, then who shapes the AI? He let the question hang. Then, our answer is everyone, not just researchers, not just governments, not just corporations, everyone. The governance engine bloomed on the screen, a visual model of traceable reasoning, human feedback loops, bias surfacing dashboards, fairness metrics that recalibrated dynamically. It was the world's first attempt to build not just an intelligence system, but an ethical nervous system for intelligence. A collective breath filled the room. Engineers took photos in disbelief. Researchers whispered, "This is 10 years ahead." Executives leaned forward with hungry curiosity. Students cried, actually cried, because they'd never imagined a future in which AI was not a black box, but a glass lantern. Satish wasn't finished. This is not a product, he said. It is a promise. A promise that the future will be built with all of us, not just the powerful few. Silence. Deep. Sacred. Then the applause came, a tidal wave of sound, rising like a sun pulled above the horizon. Satish bowed his head slightly, and the world changed again. The aftershocks. What followed in the hours after the reveal moved faster than anyone could track. Governments contacted H2O before lunch. Regulated industries called before noon. Journalists demanded interviews. Cloud providers made offers that bordered on desperate. Competitors whispered both admiration and fear. Investors smelled the scent of a new financial epoch. Satish barely had time to drink water. Meeting after meeting. Handshake after handshake. Contract after contract drafted with lightning speed. By afternoon, H2O's valuation projections had shifted again, upward, violently. In private rooms, CFOs whispered potential acquisition numbers that would have shaken the valley a few years before. Some offers climbed into the multi-billion range, but Satish turned every one of them down. Not arrogantly, not dismissively. He simply repeated the same sentence. We are not building this to be bought. We are building this to be shared. Even those who disagreed with him respected him for it. Because in a valley of exits, flips, and acquisitions, purpose was rare, vision was rarer, conviction was priceless. The night of the 1,000 conversations. The event wrapped. The signing ceremonies were done. The cameras were gone. But nobody left. Instead, people lingered for hours, talking in circles, sketching diagrams on napkins, debating philosophy in the halls, comparing notes on fairness metrics and domain-specific tuning challenges. It felt less like a conference and more like a festival of minds. At one point, Satish found himself standing on a balcony overlooking the courtyard, watching the swirling conversations below. For a moment, he wondered if this was what ancient Athens had felt like, not the sanitized version in history books, but the vibrant, alive version where ideas danced like flame and reshaped civilization. A student approached him nervously. Sir, she said, I just want to say, you've given my generation permission to hope again. Hope. The word struck him harder than any valuation, contract, or partnership. Hope was the real currency of innovation. Technology existed to turn hope into systems, systems into opportunity, opportunity into dignity. He thanked her softly and watched as she blended back into the crowd, another torchbearer in a world rediscovering its fire. The letter he didn't expect, Part 2. Past midnight, when the last of the crowd had drifted into the night, Satish returned to his hotel room. The adrenaline had worn off. Fatigue dragged at him like gravity, increasing by degrees. He collapsed into the desk chair out of habit and opened his laptop. Dozens of new emails. Hundreds. Thousands. But one, again, caught his eye. Subject: because of your platform, my school survived. He clicked. A teacher in rural Kenya wrote of how their school had used an H2O forecasting model to predict water shortages before they became catastrophic. It had enabled the community to store and ration water in time. Their crops had survived. Children stayed in school. The village endured. Satish closed the email without finishing it, not out of disinterest, but because emotion blurred his vision. There were more. A climate scientist from Argentina describing how H2OS models helped detect an irregularity in glacier melt. A financial regulator from Europe explaining how their risk detection workflow had prevented a multi-billion-dollar fraud. A small clinic from Vietnam sharing how early diagnostic models helped them treat cases they once would have missed. A mother from Texas saying thank you for the AI literacy program that allowed her daughter, the first in their family to study computer science, to land a scholarship. Satish read until the words swam. Every message was a universe. Every universe was a life. And every life was why he had chosen this path. The unseen weight of leadership. Morning came. Satish felt both uplifted and crushed under an invisible mass. Success brings expectations. Expectations bring responsibility. Responsibility brings a new form of solitude. As he sat alone in his quiet hotel suite, the truth pressed down on him. The world now expected H2O to lead. Not just in engineering, not just in business, but in ethics, in safety, in defining the boundaries of intelligence itself. He wasn't sure any human was ready for that. He certainly wasn't. But leadership wasn't about readiness. Leadership was about willingness. And Satish was willing. He looked in the mirror. He didn't see a CEO. He didn't see a tech founder. He didn't see a visionary. He saw a man holding a compass in his pocket. A man who still believed intelligence, human or artificial, should illuminate, not blind. A man who knew the future must be built with humility. That was enough. It had to be. The pilgrimage home. After 3 days of meetings, signings, celebrations, and conversations, Satish finally boarded a flight home. As the plane lifted above the clouds, California shrinking behind him, a rare, soft calm settled over his mind. He opened his notebook, the same one he had kept since his earliest days at H2O. The pages were filled with scribbles, diagrams, half-formed thoughts, questions, and small sketches that only he understood. On a fresh page, he wrote, "What is intelligence? What is compassion? What is responsibility? What is legacy?" He circled the last question. Legacy. It haunted him, not in a dark way, but in the way a mountain haunts a climber. It calls. It challenges. It asks not for fearlessness, but for courage. He closed the notebook, and for the first time in days, he slept. The return. When Satish walked into H2O headquarters the next morning, applause erupted spontaneously. Engineers left their desks. Data scientists put down their coffee. Operations staff stepped out of meeting rooms. They surrounded him. He laughed, embarrassed. "Please, everyone, let's get back to." "No," Erin said. "This moment belongs to all of us." She stepped forward, holding a small glass trophy. A simple, elegant sculpture shaped like a drop of water. Etched into its surface were 5 words. "For lighting the path forward." Satish shook his head. "I didn't do this. We did. All of us." But the team insisted. Not because they believed he had done everything, but because he had made everything possible. After the applause faded, Satish walked the halls slowly. Each desk, each meeting room, each whiteboard filled with scribbles reminded him of every moment of the last decade. The late nights, the early mornings, the prototypes that failed, the algorithms that succeeded, the people who joined, the people who left, the breakthroughs that made them gasp. H2O had grown. It had changed. The world had changed around it. But something remained the same. The mission, the belief that intelligence should be accessible, transparent, and empowering. The belief that technology should lift humanity, not overshadow it. The belief that purpose mattered more than power. In a world obsessed with speed, H2O had chosen clarity. In a world obsessed with dominance, H2O had chosen dignity. In a world obsessed with secrets, H2O had chosen openness. Satish breathed deeply. This was home. This had always been home. The long horizon. Weeks passed. H2O's generative governance engine became the talk of the global AI community. Think tanks requested briefings. Universities integrated it into curricula. Governments debated adopting it as a standard for public AI deployments. And companies, hundreds of them, began integrating H2O's generative platform into everything from healthcare diagnostics to financial forecasting to renewable energy optimization. The adoption curve didn't rise. It soared. Inside H2O, the energy was indescribable, a mix of urgency and purpose that only appears when people know they are building something that genuinely matters. And Satish, walking through the office one quiet evening after most had gone home, paused at a window overlooking the city. The sun was setting, a blaze of orange melting into deep blue. He realized something profound. H2O had reached its summit. But summits were not endpoints. Summits were foundations, platforms from which new skies could be reached. There was still so much to build. Safer models, more transparent systems, tools for educators, frameworks for emerging nations, climate alignment models, and new architectures for a world where intelligence flowed everywhere. He could feel the next decade stretching before him, vast, uncharted, brimming with possibilities and dangers alike. But he wasn't afraid. He had a team that believed, a community that supported, a mission that mattered, a compass that pointed true, and a future that was calling not with fear, but with invitation. The final understanding. On a quiet Sunday morning, months after H2O World, Satish sat alone at a small cafe. He sipped tea, enjoying the rare moment of stillness. He watched people passing by, students, families, cyclists, elderly couples, children counting cracks in the sidewalk. Something struck him then. The true impact of AI wouldn't be measured in valuation or technical papers or industry accolades. It would be measured in the quiet, invisible transformations of everyday life. A diagnosis caught early, a crop saved, a loan approved fairly, a school that survives a drought. a student who finds her voice, a family that stays whole, a life that continues. The small miracles, the human outcomes. Legacy was not a monument. Legacy was a ripple. And H2O's ripples were now reaching shores he would never see. He smiled, a soft, private, deeply satisfied smile. This, he realized, was fulfillment. Not the applause, not the partnerships, not the revolutionary models, but the knowledge that intelligence had been given back to humanity as a gift, not a weapon. He whispered a final line to himself, a line that captured everything he'd ever wanted to do. Let intelligence serve life. The words faded into the sunlight. But the mission did not. The mission had only just begun.